So, hello. Welcome to this talk about Unity meetups, user groups, and game jams. So yeah, this is a panel discussion. I don't know whether you guessed that already. So we've got a mixed group of people. We've got some people from Unity and some people from the community. The main thread of which runs through them is the fact that they may have set up a user group or be some way involved with user groups. User groups have become a pretty important part of the Unity community over the last few years. And they're growing and growing and growing. So one thing we really want to try and do at Unity is encourage their growth, set up new user groups, and try and grow the entire community in that way, because what we found is that the hubs of development that have grown around the Unity user groups have been, pretty awesome. It's a really good way of sharing experience and going to a pub after a nice day, talking about projects. So, welcome. Here's a picture of some rabbits and some cups.
Is the left one you? Or the right one?
I'm on the right. So yeah, and this is basically what we're going to cover. We're going to do a bit of an intro to everybody, a little bit of history of what they're doing and who they are. So we'll then after talk about the Unity staff on that far side and what they do and how they're involved. We'll also talk a little bit about the kind of founding stories of the user groups, because I'm sure there's some interesting insight and knowledge there. We'll also discuss things like the Unity community support and the kind of things that we'd want to do in order to help improve the growth of the Unity user groups, and also kind of set up a bit of a discussion really as to what things we can do better, what would be helpful to support, all of this kind of thing. And we're going to have quite a large component about the things that are coming in the future, some of the plans that we have, some of the things that, we can set up a dialogue and find out what kind of stuff people want in terms of user groups. And then there's going to be a kind of a pretty substantial chunk with like a questions and answers session. So we'll kind of pass the mic around. If there's people that are interested in setting up a user group, maybe they'll have some questions for specific people on the panel, that kind of stuff. So that's basically what we're covering. So I guess we should probably get started by doing an introduction. So if we kind of go maybe from left to right, and if you guys introduce yourselves and
sure.
Say who you are.
You bet. My name is Robert Brackenridge. I'm from Texas. It's kind of interesting, I guess, just kind of a quick snapshot across the panel as well. The Houston Unity group was actually probably number 2 in terms of the on Meetup.com when we started this about 2 years ago. So I'm a founder of a small studio in Houston, Texas. So those of you that don't know much about Houston, it's not the game mecca of the world. We have one studio that's about the size of about 50. That's TimeGate. They happen to be a UDK shop. So the ecosystem in terms of Houston is very, very small. And if you think about 2 years ago, the Unity developer community is certainly not as large as it is today. So it was a fairly little-known technology in the Houston area. Apart from that, I'm also on the board for 2 different game development programs in the Houston area. So community colleges that have 2-year types of programs. Out of that, you get an associate's degree. And a lot of the kids coming out of those programs were struggling. So they were sitting there going, well, gee, we've kind of got this promise to us that out of this program that they're paying quite a bit of their money to, that we're expecting to get a game industry type of a job. Well, for those of us in the industry, that doesn't always happen, especially in an area where you don't have many studios. So here I am looking at Unity and how it really is an indie-focused type of a game engine. And I thought to myself, well, you know what? It just kind of makes sense to start building this community. And through the nature of getting people together, you'll find artists, programmers, designers, and what have you, kind of all come together. And they may or may not be specifically focused on game development. They may have an interest in architecture, or they might have an interest in our case, energy types of companies will also attend. And they have an interest in building something interactive. And so what I found is that kind of putting this mixing pot together, we're starting to create something interesting. And we have about, if you go up to meetup.com, you have a way of tracking how many members you actually have. Over the last couple of years, we've built it to about 150 members, of which on a regular monthly basis, we meet monthly. I've got anywhere from 15 to 20 people that are often at our user group meetings. So out of that, what we've got is kind of this maturation of an ecosystem. So 2 years ago, nobody knew Unity. It was a bit of a challenge trying to get that initial group of 5 to 8 people to come to a meeting. Now, we have a core group of at least 20 people, and most of them are pro users. So there's this kind of transition that's happening with this ecosystem. And so for me, as that small studio there, starting things out, that's pretty huge. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why I ended up pulling together our first Unity group in Houston, was to kind of help develop the ecosystem, and also for pure satisfaction that I'd really like to start talking to game developers. In Houston, there's a lot of tech startups, there's a lot of regular entrepreneurial startups, but very few game-focused ones. And so self-serving side, I really just kind of wanted to get out there and replicate some of the things that we do, like for instance at Unite, and have a great opportunity to talk and have a beer with some of the locals. And just as a little other snapshot, I also run a Unity group now up in Austin and Dallas. Well, to contrast that, we've got completely different ecosystems in Austin and Dallas. Austin is very ingrained in the gaming community, right? So it's an interesting contrast all of a sudden when we go up there and we set up a Unity meetup group. Immediately I've got about 80 or 90 people signed up and want to come, and the meetings are about 50 to 60, and I'm actually trying to limit them down a little bit so that we don't grow too fast. So I guess before I hand it off to the next intro, what I would just encourage you to think about is look at who it is that's inside of your community. For instance, if you're focused on maybe more serious games in your area, or are there other interactive applications for marketing purposes? What is it that the people in your area might be interested in? Latch onto something that helps you kind of get that focus, whether it might be an iPhone developer group, it might be a marketing group, it might be somebody else, that all of a sudden you can kind of spin things out of and just take that first step. Because I'm guaranteeing you'll find at least 5 or 6 others in your area that'll want to do the same thing. So fast forwarding it 2 years from now, almost 2 million people going to be using this thing by the end of the year for sure. You're going to have a few friends out there that are looking for you and want to be a part of your group. So I would encourage you guys, if you're not already a member of one that's in your area, get out there and start your own. Thanks.
Cool.
Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Wu. I am the founder of Studio Pep Whooper, and I organize the Seattle Unity 3D user group. So I guess I'll give a quick intro about myself and what we do, and then we can talk about the user group and how I got into Unity, I suppose. So in the prior life, I was actually not a game developer. I was a strategist at Sony in Japan, and I've never done any coding or making art. I couldn't tell you the difference between 3D modeling, rigging, and animation. I thought it was just the same thing. But in 2009, I found Will's book on Unity, and that sort of got me thinking, well, this is an industry that I was really interested in, and I wanted to do something a bit more creative instead of just looking at spreadsheets all day. So a couple months later, I quit my job, moved back to the States, and started the studio. And for the next year or so, I was just doing this project on my own, and it was a really lonely process until I guess I met Grant around that time when I finished the game in LA, and he was organizing the LA user group, and I started getting involved in the community and seeing how it's actually a lot more fun to talk about the game development process and to interact with other game developers, and you're not alone. And that sort of epiphany was life-changing. And that sort of inspired me when I moved up to Seattle end of last year. There was no user group, so I started one. And it's a very casual group that we have, despite having, even though we have a lot of people from big companies like Amazon or Microsoft. We try to keep it casual, so people will keep coming back and just have fun. I guess one thing I really want to talk about is the importance of a community is often sort of overlooked when you either if you are trying to hire someone or if you're looking for a job. I think getting involved is probably the best thing you can do. Like the first step you can do is just get involved, go to a user group or start a user group. I've met a lot of great developers that way. So when we needed an extra hand in our projects, I can always find people from the group. And a lot of people would sort of form their little teams, and they'll compete in different competitions and they have their own projects that sort of grew out from the user group as well. But I guess we'll talk about the user group in a bit.
Hi, my name is Grant Vickland. I actually run the Los Angeles user group. My background, to give you guys a little bit of an idea, comes from visual effects and animation, where I've been working in the industry for about 16 years. I worked on movies like Titanic and Fifth Element, and I was a CG lead on the Simpsons movie. Yeah, exactly. But the last 7 years I was at DreamWorks Animation. And from there, we were doing a lot of projects on our own with myself and a couple of other people in the layout department. And we were all using Unity. And so what I really learned there was that it was actually very important to have this kind of support group. And when I left DreamWorks to help join the company Backcode, which is a company I have right now in Pasadena, we pretty much were suddenly, there was no more user group anymore. The support network disappeared because there was no user group in Los Angeles. So what I decided to do was actually start the user group in Los Angeles, and then that's how I met Brandon. And we've pretty much gone organically. I haven't had to do much advertising at all, and we're already up 240 members after about 1 year. The great thing about it is that we are actually at a point where we're getting really, really popular. So not only are we doing stuff for pretty much the game industry, which is very large in Los Angeles, but other aspects of entertainment have actually come to us and have said, hey, you know what, we want to use Unity for this type of thing. Like, for example, doing some of the presentations inside of, let's say, like CSI. You know, some of those screens that those actors interact with, historically they've been done with Flash, but what's happening is that they're looking for things where they get to do some really cool, neat stuff. So the great thing about this user group is that we're meeting people that come from different walks of life. And that has actually been a huge, huge thing for us. Because there's many times where I would never have thought of doing something that way. And by having this kind of community, we've been able to exchange ideas and stuff. And it's been really great to also get a lot of the people developing plugins to actually come in and visit us as well. So that's been a very good way for people that are selling things on the asset store to get an extra level of business and representation. So we can go in a little bit more deep, but I'll pass it on.
Hello, I'm Elliot Mitchell, and I'm the co-founder of the Boston Unity User Group in the US. I think we're one of the earliest user groups. Alex Schwartz from Alchemy Labs, Smuggle Truck, and Jack Lumber was the co-founder. I think we started about 2.5 years ago. We just went on Meetup about 6 months ago. So we have about 135 registered users, but I'd say we have 2 to 3 times more than that in our group. And the reason being is that Boston is, there are hundreds of developer shops just for games, ranging from Tencent, Warner Brothers, down to a whole bunch of indie studios. And I think one of the reasons why our group is so popular and we don't advertise is that there's all these other events. So every day in Boston, you can go to some kind of user group or game development event. There's tons of them. So my background is I come from art and education. So I taught 3D modeling, animation, game design for over a decade. And after a while, I got kind of sick of that. Academia was moving a little bit too slowly for me, so I founded my own studio in Vermont, which you think is chopping wood and stuff like that. And I started going a little bit crazy, so I drive into Boston. It's a little ways. And I was pretty much heard about Unity we have a really strong IGDA, International Game Developer Association chapter called the Boston Postmortem. Any given postmortem, there can be from 100 to 300 people showing up. And started going to that about 3 or 4 years ago, and I started hearing about this Unity thing and making iOS apps and in 3D, and 3D is my passion. So I started hearing that and meeting people about that, and I heard about GDC. So I'm like, okay, I have a game development shop, I'm gonna go to GDC, and I met Tom Higgins from Unity at the time, and started talking to him about, oh, what about a user group, you know? And it turned out that Alex also met him there and talked to him about that. And we're like, we argued for a minute, and then we're like, well, let's just team up. So we had shortly after that, Unity came to Boston. We didn't really even advertise our first meetup, and we had 100 people. It was awesome. Since then, it's just blossomed, and I think one of the keys to our success is just we sort of built on something that was already in Boston. So with the IGDA, and then out of that came Boston Indies, which is really big right now. This is before Meetup that I even heard of it. So we have a lot of we'll go up to an event and say, oh, if you're interested in Unity or whatever, come here. So it's been a big success, and there's a lot of games for health, serious games. We have Lockheed Martin come up from North Carolina to Boston to go to the user group. We have MIT and a whole bunch, Becker College, Mass Digi Game Initiative. So there's all these organizations, tons of students, tons of shops, all coming to our user group. And so it's really diverse, and it's from total noobs to Microsoft or whoever coming by. So hey, check it out.
Cool. Hi, I'm Ross Morris. I'm an evangelist at Unity. I guess one of the reasons I'm an evangelist now is because of what I was doing prior, which is the London user group. So it was set up between myself and then another guy, Jasper Stocker, and we just wanted somewhere to, talk about Unity in London. But coming to that, then I guess my kind of background sort of thing is that I grew up in Wales, kind of in the middle of nowhere in Wales, and you couldn't do anything but either work on a farm or work in a shop. And I got to the point of working in a shop where I could only be a manager, but I just wanted to make games. So I decided late on to be a student and learn how to make games. And then at that point, Unity was becoming something which people were aware of. So I started using it. I bought a Mac and I needed to make games on it. So I put in I put in Mac and then making games, and Unity came up, which was great. And then no one else was doing it. So at that point, I was quite evangelical even at that point, and just talking about Unity, saying, hey, this is really great, it's great, and it works on a Mac, that's brilliant. So I started doing a lot of stuff, talking about Unity online and trying to get kind of myself out there as a game designer. And then I got into teaching Unity because there was no one around who was really using it much, and I was one of the guys who was talking about it. So I got into teaching Unity and game design at a local university. And then from there, it kind of evolved, and then we started putting together the London Unity user group. So which has been going for a year now, just over a year, maybe 14 months, I think, and we're up to 400 registered members on meetup.com, which is pretty good. We're chuffed with that, purely because we have such a huge kind of developer base inside of London who are doing a massive amount of content really in games and in kind of serious games and in other markets as well. So we're very lucky that we have that. So yeah, that's pretty much what we did, and it's going successfully. And from the back of that, I seem to have landed a job at Unity, and now I'm doing a similar thing. So when I'm not going around Europe and doing events and talking to people and talking about how great Unity is, I'm back in London, and I'm continuing to help organize the London Unity user group. So that's pretty much it.
Hi, my name's Will Goldstone. So my background is kind of similar to Russ in a way. So, I mean, you could just remember what Russ said. But
You worked on the same farm?
yeah, exactly. So I also grew up in the valleys. No, I didn't really. No, so I taught Unity for about, I taught for about 7 years, and I picked up Unity about halfway through that, version 1.3 or something like that. At the time, we were looking at trying to build it into an interactive media course at the uni that I taught at, and we wanted to find something that was kind of like Flash, but not that boring, and did 3D and stuff like that, because we had tools to make certain things, like we were using Director for bits of 3D, but it was just really cumbersome, and it didn't really inspire students, and they couldn't pick stuff up and just play with it. So that's how I ended up getting into Unity and did some video tutorials and wrote some books and stuff like that. And that meant that I got to kind of learn from the community at the time, and kind of going to meetups and things like that has now meant that I've met people like Joe, and I met Russ, and it's weird because it's one of those situations where you speak online to people for so long. And I imagined Russ was about 40 something. I think it's because you had a black and white profile picture. You just seemed antiquated in some way. So that was interesting. And then you finally meet him, like, oh, he's just kind of normal guy. I'm not saying it ruined the magic, but it kind of did. So the meetups have been really cool, and I've just kind of latched onto the London user group. I got the T-shirt and everything, and I just kind of hang out at that. But the other thing that I do is make sure that we document all of them. You've probably seen them on the blog, well, at least I hope so. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time, right? And yeah, I think that's another thing that's really useful. Certainly, I'd say that to all of the guys here, that if you can in any way sort of document what you do, it's a good way to show, how much you care about the community and stuff, and put videos online and things like that. And another note to say to everyone is that we're going to be expanding what we call UDN, so the Unity Developer Network, soon, to include something called groups, which is pretty obvious. And hopefully that will give people who want to make user groups a more kind of integrated way. So you'll be using your UDN login, and you can make groups and then turn them into real physical groups by just setting a date and things like that. So, we've got some stuff coming in terms of supporting user groups as well. But I'm just rambling now, so I'm going to hand over to Carl.
Stereo. You can grab both mics.
Well, before I continue and talk about myself, I just would like to know who you are. So I have a few quick questions. Who from you is here to find a user group? A few people. And who from you is here to look to start their own user group? Woohoo! Okay, great. And who is from Europe here? Okay. Oh, almost everybody. Nobody from Canada? Oh, awesome. And somebody from the United States? That's awesome. Yeah. Somebody from South America? Wow, that's pretty awesome. And who is a pro Unity user? Okay. Who's an indie Unity user, like the free version? Okay. And who has already published the game? Okay, cool. Yeah. I want to come over. So I'm Karel Kallewaert. I work as Russ as a product evangelist. I think I have the coolest job in the world because I love to talk and share about the product, learn about the product, so I can learn, thanks to Will, about the product. And if you have technical issues, talk to somebody else. And if you need licenses, talk to somebody else. So I'm based in the Americas. If you're looking for me to come by and to give a presentation and work with the community, let me know. My background, I used to work in production. Worked on like Halo Wars, Rock Band, Guitar Hero. So I had a AAA game background. But I like to share my knowledge too. So I did a lot of teaching. Worked a lot with Autodesk Education. Making tutorials and then showing how you use Unity with that. And that's from there I finally end up in Unity. But I'm also very passionate about education, so I started my own private college. And I never show up anymore because I'm all the time on the road for Unity to meet with our community. So you always can contact me at carl@unity3.com if you want to set up a user group or get help or get advice in the Americas. And if Americas, that means also Hawaii, Bermuda.
Cool. Oh yeah, and me, I guess. I'm Joe Robbins, and my background is kind of a strange path as to how I found myself at Unity. I started out using Unity, much like everyone else. I was working for a very small company at the time in Manchester, or just outside of Manchester in the UK. And yeah, I kind of was again involved in the community, like primarily my main interaction with the community being kind of remote from any central hubs really. Manchester wasn't super big at that point. My main method of communication was via the Unity IRC channel. So I'd highly recommend that you look into joining the Unity IRC channel. Just out of curiosity, how many IRC people do we have in the room? Cool. So yeah, definitely check out the IRC channel if you haven't already. There's pretty much 100, 200 people in there, pretty much on average. It goes up and down, but there's a lot of cool people in there, a lot of very helpful people, you know, very patient people. It's Neil Carter, for example. That guy's a legend. Yeah, he answers any questions from the most complicated to the most simple, and he has infinite amounts of patience. So I always give him big props whenever.
You probably shouldn't say infinite though.
Well,
yeah.
he
what about
taught
the
me.
MMO questions?
Well, yeah, I guess it depends on how many MMO questions he gets per day. But yeah, he certainly taught me a huge amount of stuff, so I owe him. So yeah, the IRC channel was my kind of main conduit to the community, and whenever possible, I'm always on the IRC channel, as well as lots of the other people, lots of the other Unity developers and staff members that came from the community, which is a large proportion of us. So yeah, you'll quite often find Unity staff people hanging out in the IRC. And I went to the second Unite in 2008, which was in Copenhagen. And I met a bunch of guys there, presented my talk on my game that I'd made, and I was incredibly hungover at the time. It was a very, very rough night the night before. But I met some interesting people, and then eventually ended up applying for a job at Unity and went over to Copenhagen, where I've been living for the last 3 years now. Although recently, my job has switched over to this community evangelist role, which involves, it's kind of similar to kind of Carl's job, kind of similar to Russ's job, a little bit similar. It's kind of like a bit of a mix. Whereas Carl is on the sales team, I'm on the marketing team. So we have quite a bit of crossover along the way, but there's also some differences. I tend to do a lot of events-related stuff in terms of going out and recceing different conferences, and maybe it's worth us being out here, so I'll go out and see whether or not it's viable for us to maybe have a significant presence at various events. And other stuff that I've been kind of concentrating on as well is a lot of stuff with game jams. I'm a big fan of game jams ever since the first global game jam that I managed to go along to down in London. It was just a fantastic experience. I kind of, really learned a huge amount about development and developing something in a short period of time. So I've been trying as much as possible to support the whole concept of game jamming and through as many ways possible. One of the main things is just simply getting in contact with people who are organizing game jams and offering licenses to the people participating, which is pretty much the very least we can do. So if you are ever planning on doing a game jam or involved with a game jam somehow, send me an email, get in contact with me on Twitter or something, and I'd be happy to hook you up with some licenses, because it's the least we can do, and everyone wins. So yeah, that's, I guess, kind of my origin story. So I guess, thank you. So yeah, I guess we can move on now into more kind of like the founding stories. I guess with this, maybe a kind of a discussion of the things that for you went well, the things that maybe didn't go so well, and the struggles that you found when growing the group. Because obviously, that's maybe the first thing that people will think, like, maybe I shouldn't do it. Maybe there's too much money involved. Where does that come from? How do I find a venue? There's a lot of questions, I guess, that people might have. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so I run my group on a philosophy of cheap. I mean, really cheap. So I try to do it from a zero-based budget. So taking cost into consideration off the very front, I tend to find either a school that I will be able to, have a meeting room available. Often there's an instructor from a particular degree program in the area that also teaches using Unity or game development in general. So I try and identify that person and then ask them if they would mind hosting an event there, which is a really nice venue because you'll often have a projection screen. There are many different bar areas that are also like, so in Austin, for instance, there's a bar there that hosts us and it's free. Again, they have a projector for us there and everything. Obviously, the idea would then, the patrons of the meetups would then spend a certain amount of money there. Hopefully, you would encourage them to do so, taking things into consideration, of course. But then on top of that, recently, because of the size of the various groups, we've been encouraged by sponsors now at this point. So sponsors will often come in and say, hey, can I buy you guys some pizza or buy you guys some beer, or can I even host you at our facility? So when you're getting into the Unity discussion, many times there are larger studios that are interested in the product as well, and they recognize the value of being a part of these larger communities. So I would just say, from those of you that are considering starting this up, just like a regular startup, think low budget. Think something that you don't have to continue to shell out every time. It's great if you do, buy a couple of pitchers of beer or buy some pizza or something, but don't do it all the time. Try and keep it as something that you could keep going for 2 years and it's not going to kill you. The other part to the whole startup thing is I think that we've had a kind of a chat a bit about tools and things about, for instance, I'm very excited about the whole Unity Developer Network coming into play. But one of the pieces of advice I would say back when I was founding this is, and transitioning again today since I founded, 2 other groups up in Austin, Meetup.com is very good in terms of something that's very easy, very simple, and inexpensive for you to set up. But if that's not the community that you're often involved with, go for another community. Like, are you active on Facebook? And would you just benefit by putting up a Facebook page and then running events through Facebook? Again, very cheap, doesn't cost you anything. And if you have a large group of people that are already your friends up there, if you've got 200 or 300 people, and probably some of them are also in the gaming space, maybe it makes sense for you to look at that. And so that was kind of my lesson learned is, I ran it from meetup.com 2 years ago, and it kind of slowly but surely started to take off. But had I done it today with a larger kind of group of friends within other extended communities, whether it's Google+, LinkedIn, or what have you, I'd probably look at it, well, my majority of the people that I know in this particular area with a common interest of myself resides here. Therefore, I would probably also try and at least build my initial community using that particular tool.
Okay, so how we started, so basically I was moving to Seattle at the end of last year, and I looked into trying to find a user group because I know I wanted to continue going to these events, and I didn't see one, so I just decided, well, maybe I'll just start one. And so I started the group before I even moved to Seattle, and I think that was probably a good move because obviously there are a lot of people who's been thinking about starting one or who's been thinking about going to these events. So before I even arrived in Seattle, we already have 10, 20 people in the group, and I just quickly organized the first event in the first week when I arrived, and just pick a random bar, and all these people showed up. And in terms of venue, I think that's sort of how everything sort of came together. Is once you have the people of the similar group, similar interests, they are going to help out. They are going to say, well, I know this place that you can use, or you try. I'll talk to my boss and see if we can use the office space, and it just sort of started growing from there. So I think my first advice would be just if you're thinking about starting a user group, just do it today. Just go on meetup.com, register, and just get started, because it is going to take some time to grow that group of people, but the earlier you can start, the better, and then you're going to find out that people are willing to help out. Like, they don't do it for a credit, or people are not expecting to get paid for any of this, but I I think that's one nice thing about the Unity community is people are very supportive of each other, and I think it probably grew out of this sort of root of independent development. And even though people in larger companies are using it too now, but I think that spirit is still there, and we get a lot of volunteers, people volunteering their time to help out with events. One thing, so far I haven't encountered any big problems with the group. I mean, it grew organically, nice people to hang out with, and since the group is fairly casual, that there's never any serious conversations about, no arguments of any sorts. The only problem I had was once your group gets to a certain size, there will be people who are trying to sort of take advantage of your group. These are people outside of the community, people outside of Unity. So I'm not going to name names, but a couple months ago, we had this little problem where this third-party company was hosting an event, and they wanted to invite our developers, and I was happy to send out an email to inform everyone that there's this great event. But then they just sort of hacked the system a bit and managed to send out an email on behalf of Meetup.com, which people thought, well, is this an official Unity 3D user group event now, even though it's not entirely related to Unity 3D Unity. So we kind of had to apologize and figure out how to prevent that from happening again. And I think that's just something to watch out for once you have a larger group of people in the same industry, tech focused, then there are going to be some other people trying to take advantage of that. But I think overall, it's fairly. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of upsides to starting a user group or joining a user group. It's fairly self-sustaining, and in the beginning we had some problems sort of like trying to find presenters, because I always wanted someone to sort of present some new ideas or new plugins or new projects. And when you only have 5, 10, 15 people, you don't have a lot of candidates. But once you get over the first few months, it just sort of grew organically.
Cool.
Yeah, I would say that I've actually had the same kind of experience in the sense that it grows organically, and the first meetup seems to start in a bar. So, which is kind of part of the casual nature of a user group. So for us, actually, the hardest thing for us was actually finding a good venue. That actually was something that took a little bit of time, but as we started to develop a good reputation, before you know it, people are knocking at our door saying, oh, host it here, come to our place. And especially in a place like Los Angeles, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Los Angeles, but it is a huge city, to a point where Robert's got one in Austin, one in Dallas, and one in Houston. And so just within Los Angeles, we have we do one meeting on the west side and then one up in the valleys, just because we are that big of a city. But the cool thing is that it also plays into our diversity and stuff like that. So now at this point in time, we've got Hollywood studios. They're saying, hey, host it right here because we have a really strong game division. We've got companies that are doing really cool things with really neat technology like augmented reality and stuff like that. They're saying, hey, host it here. And so we're getting a lot of good traction and feedback, which is actually a very, very good thing for us. The other thing that also helps with is that it helps us with presenters. So as we start to build a really good, strong base, we start to get more and more traction from more and more different people who want to do presentations. Because even because SIGGRAPH is in Los Angeles, we had a Logarithmic came by and actually did a whole entire presentation on Substance 3. And we were turning people away for that presentation because, A, the space was only so big, but there was so much interest in it. So the cool thing about it is that everybody comes back afterwards and says, oh, that was the coolest thing I've seen. They want to learn more about it. And next thing you know, we have these big discussions, and then people keep talking about it. And then next thing you know, our group is growing more and more and more organically. We're not having to do any advertising for ourselves. The great thing about it is that one person just tells one other person. They go, oh yeah, I'm using Unity at home, or I'm using Unity in my job. Next thing you know, I'm looking at the registration list, and it's like, oh, there's 3 more this week, there's 5 more this week, 10, 15, boom, boom, and it keeps growing. And so even though it might seem a little bit slow in the beginning, next thing you know, it will start snowballing and the group will just kind of keep on getting bigger and bigger.
So I probably should mention, because I forgot, that I actually am a technical director at Infrared 5. And Infrared 5, like other companies in Boston, sponsors events. Our space is too small. So we have 20 developers. So for our first meetup, we actually didn't do a bar, although Boston has a billion Irish pubs, and that's where the IGDA meets. So our first event was actually co-sponsored by Unity. I think we were lucky. I don't know if that happens too much anymore. And we had a giveaway, and actually Carl, before he worked for Unity, won Unity. Can we have our license back? And so we had it at a university. Boston has a lot of universities, so we had it at a university, and it was mixed. We had sponsorship from one of the largest independent studios in Boston. They gave us like $1,000 for food. So we had 100 users turn up. We had a Unity evangelist there. We had giveaways. That was really helpful, and I think it's a little bit more difficult to do that, but maybe they're going to ramp that up again. There was a major pitfall with that, as we had to come up with insurance money and all this BS from the university. So in the Boston area, there's a venue from Microsoft, New England Research Center. It's called the Nerd Center, and they host all kinds of events. And they just give you free space. But the bummer is, in Boston, everyone expects beer. If you don't have beer, you're going to get about a third of the people, literally. So the Nerd Center, we had to come up with paying money for bartenders to be there, and they had to be Microsoft special bartenders.
What?
For whatever reason. So, yeah, so that we were there for a while, and they had good space, and you had to book a bit ahead of time. So we started looking at other venues, and we wound up going to another one in Cambridge across the river, where Boston Indies was meeting, and there we had to have a $500 minimum for no charge, and usually it was pretty good. We could get that, encourage people to keep eating and drinking, but that space became so small, especially at demo nights. Demo night's another way to bring people in. You have presentations and you have everyone just sort of demo stuff. But when we had demo nights, there was never room on tables for people to buy food. And so we've been jumping around the venues, and we think we found another good one that's free. It has leather couches, it has food, it has a bar, it has upstairs, downstairs, and that's worked out really well. To keep our numbers up and growing, we recently, as I said before, started using Meetup, but Alex and I are both very active on Twitter. And that's kind of how I've met most people that I see around here. So on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we go to all these other events, and it just draws people. But I would say diversify the social media you're using to get users. Also now we have major, we've been sponsored by Autodesk. We're talking to Adobe. We've combined user group meetings with other larger meetings. I think Russ came out recently, and we had 3D Stimulus Day mixed with Boston Unity Group and the MassDG Game Challenge, which is a few hundred people in the Microsoft building. And that raised a lot of awareness of Unity and interest in the group. So build alliance. I guess my final advice on this would just be build alliances, get sponsorship, get a big space, and let Unity know what you're doing, whether that's on Twitter or Facebook or directly like at these conferences.
Yeah, letting us know is like a big thing, isn't it? Because it was, like Joe was saying, we're always really happy to support, and any time that I can go out to Boston is great. It's just good. I think with the London one, the best thing to mention first is that it's actually the second London user group. There was an original one, which was maybe a couple of years ago, and they had maybe 3 or 4 meetings in total, and it just stopped. And I think one of those reasons was financial reasons. So what Rob was saying about trying to make it cheap, you don't want to have to pay for these things and no one turns up, And then I think they had some internal kind of political issues as well. So I went to a couple of those and I spoke at those as well. So there was an obvious, there was guys in and around London who were interested in Unity, but at that point it was like, well, I've got it downloaded at home, but my boss would never ever consider using it in the office, sort of thing. So if we flash forward like a year on from that point, there was no user groups that were done, there was nothing going on. I'd graduated by that point, I was trying to find work, I was trying to legitimize myself as a Unity developer. So I got speaking with Jasper Stocker, who set it up alongside me, and we were like, oh, it's a shame there's no user group. You know, the original one, it could have worked. And we were like, yeah, it could have worked, really, really could have. We were like, oh, someone should do one, right? Someone should set this thing up. We're like, yeah, maybe someone should. And then we kind of mutually tweeted at each other, you should do it. And then we were like, oh, we should do it. So we just sent a tweet out just saying, hey, is anyone interested in getting together in London, probably in a pub, just having a drink and talking about Unity, you know? We'll pick up some chicks. Chicks love Unity, right? And then we got some tweets back from other people saying, yeah, I'd love to do that. That'd be great. And it was about 3 or 4 people within a couple of hours. And we thought, oh, that's cool. And then we were just going to do a pub meet. We were just going to get together and just have a drink. And then we decided, well, why not try it out and see if we can do it properly. So I had linked to the university. I said, can we host this here? And they said yes. And I said, do we have to pay you? And they said no, and that was great. So we had a venue, and having it at university makes it legitimate. People look at it and go, hey, this is a proper group, right? It's not just some guys going to the pub who are all mates. And you know, if you're going to an event and you don't know anyone there, you don't want to walk in and kind of feel as though you have to find them in a pub and stuff like that. If you go to a university, then you know exactly where to go. You can just sit down on your own for a little while, and it's okay. It's not as tough. So yeah, we had the university, and then we put together the Meetup page, and then we tried to structure it in a way and communicate with the potential users who were coming and saying this is for people who are interested in getting into Unity, and also people who maybe been using it for a year or so. So we had a program and a schedule, and said the first talk is about starting to use Unity, so people who knew nothing could learn something. And then the second talk, I think you guys came down, didn't you? And that was the big thing. I think that's the main thing that made it work, was the fact that Unity came down. Because then it's in a proper venue, we've got a talk for new users, and then we've got the Unity coming along. Like, this must be a real thing. Why not go along to it? So we had about 40 people who came along to that one. It went down well. People said we should do this all the time. And we decided to just keep organizing it. So we have it every month. It's always held at the same venue, which I think is good. I mean, do you do it at different venues throughout?
Yeah, so kind of in a LA sense, Houston is very spread out. And so in order to attract more people, I tend to move it around to various different locations. I happen to have the luxury of having several locations that I can kind of choose from. But that does represent its own logistical challenges. You're always trying to work out the technology. You're always trying to work out making sure the doors are unlocked and the security is available, and other silly things, or insurance in the case of Boston. I've ran into that issue as well. So I like to move it around, but it certainly makes it a lot easier if I can have it in a single location.
Yeah, so it depends on where you guys are thinking of setting one up, but there are kind of other issues which might occur in that case. But we're lucky we keep it at the same venue so people can come along. And like I was saying before, it's those new guys, they just know where to go. They don't have to worry about, you know, sitting down at a table and, you know, getting to know people. And it's tough to do that, especially if you're an introverted kind of game developer, like pretty much everyone is.
Yeah, in the big metro areas, it can be a challenge, you know, especially if at traffic time, if you have a meetup held at 6:30 and you're on some hot spot area where traffic is really bad, all of a sudden, people either give up and don't come, or so it is a consideration.
Yeah, and then, well, after every event we go to the pub, so that's the real clincher. And
just a quick note on that. One of the things that I have nothing against pubs and having beer, but I would encourage you also to think of having it in a venue. For instance, in universities, you can't necessarily have alcohol, but pick a location that's kind of fun and interesting, that you might interest people that are either in elementary or higher ed. I kind of run like a family type of a deal where, for instance, we hold meetings out at our the Houston Museum of Natural Science. They lend us one of their, what they call the Challenger Lab, which has a bunch of computers in it. It's very space themed. And we have lots of kids who all of a sudden who are the budding game developers of the future that are looking for somebody to talk to about game development and game design. And I love it when those kids show up. It's absolutely phenomenal. So just think of other areas rather than just always the pub crawl, which I still love, that you might also be able to attract some of the other local areas as well. And maybe you as a community are serious games focused, and then that might generate some business amongst the other schools in the area too.
Yeah. I think I'm pretty much done with mine, but I just wanted to ask very quickly, is anyone Welsh? Are you? Oh, Diane? Okay, cool.
Cool. That's good actually, because I was thinking it was almost starting to sound a little bit like an Alcoholics Anonymous panel here. So yeah, we're actually running. I mean, I guess we could carry on talking for ages about this, but we're kind of running way behind schedule. So I think maybe with the last 10 minutes or so, we should start doing some dialogue with the with the audience and try and get some questions. Anyone who's interested in setting up a user group. So yeah, just yeah.
Yeah, hi. Robert, you mentioned that you involved like primary and like middle school as well. What is the makeup of the different user groups? Like, is it primarily professionals, or do you involve students as well? And what are you like general views on that? What sort of makeup?
That's a very fascinating question. And again, I'm talking about Austin, Dallas, and Houston. Houston has what I thought were, 2 game programs, basically cranking out around 150 to 200 graduate students coming out of game programs. And so I thought I was going to be inundated by students, but the reality is everybody in my group is typically professional. So it's not like your fear, a lot of the IGDA chapters have this fear that if they hold these events that they're just going to be swarmed by students constantly looking for jobs. That's not the case. What I have found that there are more professionals that actually come to these Unity meetups on a regular basis, and so therefore it's a really great networking opportunity. And my clawback to that is if you're a student and you're not at these things, you're really missing the boat. But again, kind of the secondary and primary side of things, I think that by doing these events at different areas, we're also encouraging that next generation of students. And I actually have a couple of members of the meetup that also teach at various different secondary institutions. And so it's just kind of a great lead-in for that sort of a mix. But these gentlemen may have a little bit different mix to offer as well.
In our group, I think we have about 50% sort of people starting to get into Unity, a lot of animators or artists, people who were doing films before, commercial films or whatnot, and then 50%, about 50% really advanced users who's been doing Unity projects for a while, and also companies who are looking to hire. I think the user group is usually a very good place to hire Unity developers. But that also reminds me, this one experience I had was about 3 months ago. This guy showed up, and he was wearing this huge jacket and with a trolley, a shopping cart with lots of stuff in it. And I was thinking, well, are you here for the user group? Because I was a little bit, it's not typical to see someone with that sort of appearance to come to the user group. And then we welcomed him, and everyone was very nice, and he sort of integrated with the group. And later on, I found out that he was a game developer before, but then things happened, and now he's sort of in recovery mode. And so he's been coming since. Every month he comes, and I think there is a certain value in sort of having a community, be it for the artists or for the programmers, for people trying to get into the industry, or just for anyone who needs sort of a family, outside of family kind of situation.
Cool. Yeah. So we just have one question down here.
Yeah. Just a general question. On the Unity website, of course, there's the part which says community. I was wondering maybe if you know of any plans or ideas to actually put those user groups on just a little link on the website. As you said, many users are also very introverted people, and also for people that travel, they definitely check out the website and the forums all the time. Maybe if there was a little link there saying, hey, the Boston user group or the Houston user group is there, let's go. Right. And then you maybe see also the events, and if you're traveling, you're there a week, who knows, maybe you're lucky enough to go to one of those events.
Yeah, this is actually something that we kind of discussed earlier as we were kind of meeting before the panel. The kind of integration with the Unity website beyond, so we have the Unity developer network that we're kind of working on and expanding to some degree. But in addition to that, having the whole thing of unity3d.com/Boston/London and having those kind of hubs is certainly something that I think we're going to look into now.
Yeah, I think we'll also, like, in addition to having groups be a way of starting real physical groups, we'll also build some support for, you know, something with a map and some general find a group in your area. So effectively, maybe hooking into the meetup.com API and just making use of that to drop pins and show people where those meetups are, because it would be super easy for us to do, and there's not really much. I know we've said a lot of that in this conference. There's totally no reason for us not to do it.
Yeah. And then kind of expanding on that as well, there's the kind of whole concept of one of the things that's going on with the London Unity user group, primarily due to the proximity of the Brighton office in the UK, is the fact that we have the ability to record all of these talks that are given and then upload them to the website. Having tighter integration globally of all of this content and having it shared between all of the user groups is definitely one of our aims. There's like, it's kind of a shame that we don't have like all night, but I think, what have we got? We've got about maybe time for one more question, one brief one. Yep.
Hi, thank you for sharing first. And I've got a question. Is there a place on the internet where we can find all the groups and all the people in charge of those groups and contact them, ask questions? And if not, how is the actual state of groups in Europe? We are in London, is there other groups, or how do we find them?
Yeah, I mean, basically typing in a search generally for your city and Unity user group is a good place to start, naturally. There is user groups in all kinds of places. Paris has a pretty thriving community right now. I guess there's a lot. We talked briefly again before as well about the possibility of having some kind of Unity user group coordinator mailing list that we can set up as well. So I'd highly encourage anyone who's interested in either setting up a user group or somebody who already has a user group to catch one of the Unity guys up here before the end of Unite. Get your contact details, because I think we can probably jump on that pretty quickly just so we can continue the conversation beyond Unite and get things rolling.
Actually, I'll just add in that one of the ways that I found out that there wasn't a Los Angeles user group was actually by going into the news threads. So yeah, doing that search, basically, that a lot of people post when at least one post will probably be in the history of one of those news threads that says that, oh, you know, started the London group or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. So that's usually a good spot to check to see if there already one exists. Or I don't know if Meetup's in Europe at all, but meetup.com is a big spot for us in the States. So.
Yep. Excellent. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Do you reckon we've got time for one last quick question? Or? Yep, one over the back there. May as well squeeze every second of time that we have.
Thank you, guys. I wanted to ask, is there something specific in these meetups that you do that you found generated most interest?
That's a good general question.
I'll just say quickly that we actually have to keep variety. So we just don't do all for programming engineering. We have to make sure we mix in art, business development, how to publish a small studio, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the variety is an important thing. One thing that we do try and make sure that we're doing is for the people who come to the user groups, because there's people, like we were saying about demographics and age, right? That's not the important thing. The important thing is why they're there. You know, whether they've been in the industry for 20 years or whether they're trying to get into the industry. That's the reason. So yeah, we try and put, like, because it's every month. One month we'll be talking about shaders, and the next month we'll have a studio come in and they'll be showcasing a game. Because when you get a studio in, the people who were there thinking, well, I want to use Unity because I like using it, are there studios which are using it, and they see those guys around and they get to speak to them, that's why they'll keep coming back. So you need to try and identify the possible reasons why people would come. Some people just come because their friends go there now. Other people come for other reasons. So yeah, just try and vary it and make sure that people are getting what they need.
So what we do is I usually try to get giveaways. If we're talking about a specific plugin, I'll contact the guy who did the plugin. Giveaways, it works really well, and Unity giveaways is always a great success. And I think it's always important to make sure that people are bonding outside of the presentation. So like you do an hour and a half presentation and just let people mingle. And I think that's when people, that's really sticky. Like when people know each other well, when people like each other. So what usually happens is after the meetup, you'll see a huge group of people just outside the building because we got kicked out of the building around 10 o'clock, and then people would gather and then they'll talk to each other, and then they go to a bar or whatever. Alcohol helps a little bit as well. But I think that's what sort of keeps the group together is, it's kind of like the casualness of it and the sort of friendship that glues everyone together.
Yeah, one kind of last thing I wanted to add about variety is that we found that adding open mic sessions where we didn't really know who was going to turn up were quite good once they were established. So maybe the first time you do it, people get up and it's a bit disjointed, but after 2-3 times you get people really, really well prepared and they can talk for maybe 10-15 minutes and then have several of those, because the first, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 sessions we did that had just postmortems about games kind of ended up being slightly formulaic, not to kind of insult any of those guys, but you'll find obviously with certain types of games that are similar, people will talk about the same kind of problems they had. So they'll say, oh, well, we came across this problem and hey, don't use Unity GUI and do this and do that. And, we kind of get these kind of discussions over and over again and people are like, oh, well, I've kind of seen this, or at least I felt that way, which is a bit fascistic of me. But I think adding open mics helps that, and also making sure that, if you building up a community of people that come every time, make sure that what you do isn't the same as what you've done last month or the month before that, and trying to keep it fresh is probably the biggest challenge of these things. Another good source of that is to look at what game jams are going on and make sure that you're aware of game jams in your area, see what people have made, look on congregate.com and look at games that have been successful from that, and then try and find, we've had a few open mics and a few full sessions that people just talk about the game jam and their experience of using Unity and how they got into the jam, how it went, and it's usually a great source of that, because you have often really quirky games coming out of it because there's such a short time constraint.
Cool. So I guess we should wrap it up. Unfortunately, there's a lot that we wanted to cover more, but I guess that's the beauty of time. I think it's great that we've got like an initial thing started out here as well, though. I think we've got some good stuff to work with. So by all means, catch us as we're around the next couple of days, and we can start working on the future. And next year we'll come back and the panel will be all the way around the room. Yeah. Excellent.
Thanks, guys.